So we are going to finish up on Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, and then we're going to see the Rif, the Rosh, and the Nemuke Yosef, and the sheet that I sent you. But let's start with the Gemara at the top of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Okay, again, we're in the sugya, and this is going to be back and forth, back and forth. Hadar b'chatzer chavero shalomi daito. Tzarech la'alot lo schar or ein tzarech la'alot lo schar. Does he have to pay or he doesn't have to pay in a case where that he's a renter and the house is not normally for rent? So that's a zen nane because he normally rents. V'zel lo chaser, and the person who he lived in his house or in the chaser doesn't lose anything. And that's back and forth, yes or no. Okay, so we're on Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, and the Gemara brings a couple of interesting, very cryptic, contradictory Amoraic statements. Okay, so if you remember, we want Shalach Le at the very top. Shalach Le Rabbi Abba Bar Zabda Lemari Bar Mar Boy Minei Me Rav Huna. Please, when you get to Rav Huna, ask him the following question. Hadar b'chatzer chaveru shalomi daito. I'm at the top of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Hadar b'chatzer chaveru shalomi daito. Tzarech la'alot lo schar o lo. Rav Huna is the man to answer this question. Adahachi nach nafshe de Rav Huna. But by the time they got to Rav Huna, he had passed away. So now how do we get an answer? Amarle Rabba bar Rav Huna. This is Rabba bar, the son of Rav Huna. Hachi Amar Abba Mari Mishmei de Rav. This is what my father Rav Huna said in the name of Rav. Pay careful attention to what we're about to say. Eino tzarech la'alot lo schar. V'asocher bayit mi Ruvain ma l'schar l'Shimon. He said that a person who is dar b'chatzar chavero does not have to pay rent, but hasocher bayit mi Ruvain. But if you rent a house from Ruvain, you got to pay rent to Shimon. So I hope everybody understands that makes no sense. Shimon maya vidite. Well, what's Shimon doing in this picture? You said that hadar b'chatzar chavero shalomi daito. Reuven lives in Shimon's house shalomi daito. You don't have to pay rent. But I'm sorry, let's not use Reuven Shimon. Okay, if somebody rents a house from Reuven, he doesn't have to pay Reuven rent if it's. I'm sorry. Again, start again. Somebody is dar b'chatzar Reuven shalomi daito. He doesn't have to pay Reuven rent. But if he rents it from Reuven, he has to pay rent to Shimon. Well, what is Shimon doing here? Shimon maya vidite. So hachi ka'amar. Okay, here's what he meant. That in the second statement, nimtza habayit shel Shimon, meaning he rented it from Reuven, and it turns out that Reuven was, I don't know what word to use now, right? He was a con man, and he rented Shimon's house to the person, and then the person lived there, and it says he's got to pay Shimon, mala lo schar. So he made two statements, and you'll see tarti means it's a contradiction. So it says hadar b'chatzar chavero ein tzarech la'alot lo schar. But if Reuven pretends that the house is his, and Levi lives in the house, then Levi's going to have to pay rent to Shimon. Says the Gemara tarti, that's a contradiction. Because at the end of the day, when Reuven rented the house to Shimon that wasn't his, then Reuven rented the house to Levi when the house wasn't Reuven's. It turned out to be Shimon. So Levi lived in Shimon's house, shalomi daito, of Shimon. So why should he have to pay rent? That's a contradiction. Says Rashi, tarti. So look at the Rashi. Ein tzarech la'alot lo schar. That was the first din that Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav. V'od amar Abba Mari, de'asocher bayit mi Ruvain, nimtzeis bayit shel Shimon, v'hu sachra mi Ruvain. So the guy, Levi rented the house from Reuven, but it turned out to be Shimon's house. So Levi lived in the house that Reuven rented him, quote unquote, that was Shimon's house. All right? Malaschar Shimon, he has to pay rent to Shimon. Says the Gemara, tarti bitmia, that's a contradiction. Kolomar, tarti mili ka'amar, you said two things, the satrana adade, they contradict each other. Why? The haida sachar beit Shimon mi Reuven. So Levi rented Shimon's house from Reuven. So Levi lived in Shimon's house that he rented from Reuven. The Havile dar b'chatzar Shimon shalomi dai Shimon. So he ended up moving into Shimon's house. thinking that it was legitimate. It turned out to be illegitimate. But at the end of the day, when the dust settles, Levi lived in Shimon's house, Shalomi Daito of Shimon. So v'kamer tzarich lalot lo schar, v'reisha kamer ain't tzarich. So it's a contradiction. Because at the end of the day, what Levi did is he lived in Shimon's house, Shalomi das Shimon. You're right, Reuven tricked him and he moved in but at the end of the day, how does Shimon become entitled to rent when Levi lived in Shimon's house, Shalomi Daito? And the Gemara,
and this was lo kaima la'agra?
Oh, answers the Gemara, kaima la'agra de lo kaima la'agra. When he made the first statement of Adar b'chotzer chavero, ain't tzarich lalot lo schar, he's talking about a house that's not kaima la'agra. But when Reuven rented Levi Shimon's house inappropriately, Shimon's house was a kaima la'agra. And therefore, even though Levi lived in Shimon's house, thinking he's renting it from Reuven, since it was a kaima la'agra, he was dar b'chotzer chavero of Shimon, Shalomi das Shimon, but it was a kaima la'agra, and therefore he's a nenev, and Shimon was a chaser. Itmar nami. Wait, just hold for a minute, please. Itmar nami. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Avin. Amar Rav. Ve'amri lo Amar Rabbi Chia bar Avin. Amar Rav. Amar Rav Huna. Amar Rav Huna. Hadar b'chatzer chaveru shalomi daito eino tzarich lalot lo schar. Ve'asocher bayit mi b'nei ha'ir. But if you rent a house from the city elders, meaning there's a communal house, and you rented it from the b'nei ha'ir, malas schar l'baylim. You have to pay rent to the owners of that house. Bailim maya viditaya. What are the Bailim doing here? Hachika Omar nimtzu lo Bailim, meaning the Bnei Ha'ir rented a house thinking that it didn't belong to anybody. So Reuven moved into the house thinking it doesn't belong to anybody, and it turns out that it belonged to Shimon. So he has to pay Shimon rent. Hi, Tarti. Well, I'm saying, but he was a dar b'chatzer chaver shalomi daito. So at the end of the day, he moved into Shimon's house without Shimon knowing about it, and you just said hadar b'chatzer chaver ain't tzarich lalot lo schar. Let's just see Rashi, and then I'll take any questions. Why do you have to pay rent to Shimon? Okay. All right. So we'll stop there. There was a question, I think. Somebody had a question. Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, I think we need to understand the lo kaima la'agra case, because
it's a regular. Wait. The lo kaima la'agra is a straightforward case with no Reubens and no Shimons and no nothing.
No. This weirdo case where
the weirdo case is a kaima la'agra.
But what is the weirdo case if it's not a kaima la'agra? Because that's really.
It sounds like if Reuven fooled Levi into moving into Shimon's house.
Right.
And Shimon's house was a lo kaima la'agra, then he won't have to pay rent.
That sounds
because I'll tell you why. Because Levi is no worse than a guy who just went into Shimon's house without anybody telling him anything. He's a dar b'chatzer chaver shalomi das of Shimon. So the fact that Reuven convinced him to go into the house, that in no way makes the dar chayiv any money. If you hold hadar b'chatzer chaveru shalomi daito ein tzarich lalot lo schar when it's a lo kaima la'agra.
Oh, okay. It's midini adam here.
Everything here is in court. Everything here is in court. Everything here is in court. Okay. Now we'll see. You know what? Okay, we'll see in the Rishonim, because there's one twist here. I thought you were going to ask it, but you didn't. So we'll leave it for now. Okay.
So I'm sorry. So the Gemara is saying ultimately this really was a kaima la'agra. It's just that this con man Reuven thought that he might be able to chop Orion to get the money for it. But if it was not a kaima, if Shimon never intended to rent out his apartment, then it's a lo kaima la'agra.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, all of this is talking where Levi never paid rent to Reuven. Levi never paid rent to Reuven. Right? It's just that Reuven told him move into the house for $1,000. Okay, and Shimon and Levi moved in, and then it turned out to have been Shel Shimon's. So Levi doesn't have to pay anybody rent if it was lo kaima la'agra, but he has to pay Shimon rent if it was a kaima la'agra. That's what it seems to say. That's the simple understanding. Okay. There will be a couple of permutations on this. We'll see later when we get to the Rishonim, if nobody thought to ask. Okay. Let's read on in the rest of the Gemara. Yeah. Okay. Amar Rav Schora. Amar Rav Huna. Amar Rav. Hadar b'chotzer chaver shalomi daito ein tzarech lahalot lo schar mishum. It's giving a reason why you don't have to pay rent. Shenemar v'shia yukat sha'ar. Says Rashi, what does that mean? What does that pasuk mean? Where's the Rashi? Shenemar shia yukat sha'ar. Shade, sheshvo shia, mechatet sha'ar bayit, she'ein b'nei adam darin bo. So shia yukat sha'ar, shia gives a makkah, gives a damages a house that's empty. And therefore, so hilkach zesha amad bo henhahu. So really, when Reuven moved into Shimon's house, Shalomi Daito, and Shimon's house was empty until Reuven moved in, he did him a favor. So he did him a favor, and therefore he doesn't have to pay rent. Lishnachrina, bayit shehu sha'ui v'yachid me'en adam yukat shar mazikin mechatetin oso. Again, that there's some kind of a devil, some kind of a demons that attack an empty house, and therefore when Reuven moved into Shimon's empty house, he doesn't have to pay rent because he did him a favor. Okay? Amar Mar Barav Ashi Lididi Chazile Umangach Kitura. Little bit of a tricky shot here, but the simple understanding is I saw an abandoned house and it was really terrible. An abandoned house is a terrible thing. So therefore, when somebody moves into an abandoned house, he's doing the owner a favor. Okay? And therefore, he doesn't have to pay rent. Okay? Now, again, it's clear that this is only talking I shouldn't say it's clear. Nothing's clear whether this is a low kaima la'agra or a kaima la'agra. Okay, so he's giving a reason where your default was that he has to pay rent. Okay, but since it's an abandoned house, he did you a favor, so therefore he doesn't have to pay rent because he benefited you. And Rav Yosef Omar, a different reason why you don't have to pay rent. Beisa miyatva Yosef. Says Rashi, what does that mean? Beisa, a house, miyatva, that is dwelled in, Yosef is taken care of. Bayit shehu miyushav, bediras b'nei adam, Yosef, yishuvo kaya. It's maintained. An empty house falls into disrepair. When somebody's living in the house, it's properly maintained. Lefisha hadarim betocho roin mahu tzorich umetaktin oso. You know, that the way they see that there's a window, people fix up a house if they're living in it. So therefore, the guy who moved into your empty house, that he probably did some benefit to you. He probably get you, he took care of the house. He didn't let the house fall into disrepair. And therefore, even though he lived in it and he was a nene, but so are you. Because living in it was benefit to you because he probably took care of it. My beinaihu, if each one gives a different reason for din, there's got to be a halacha l'maisa difference in din. De kamishtamesh be betzivi v'tivna. Says Rashi. So tzivna v'tivna means wood and straw. He uses the house as a storage house. So says Rashi. De kamishtamesh bo bal habayit betzivi v'tivni shayu eitza v'tivno betocho. So he had a house he used it to store wheat and straw. So it's not a fully empty house. It's wheat and straw. And he went in, the guy moved over, he pushed the straw on the side, and he lived in the house. Mishum Shia. So if it's because you're worried about the demon, Leka, it's not an abandoned house, it's a used house. It's just used for a straw. So there's no demons coming. But Mishum Besa Miyatva Ika. But at the end of the day, the house is going to be better maintained because there's a person living in the house. The person who lived there did him a favor. He benefited him because right now it was only going to be a storehouse, and the guy living there made sure that the house is kept up in repair. That's the end of the Gemara. Before we get into halacha l'maisa, one of the things that the Rishonim are going to struggle with, and I think next time I'll print out a sheet, because there's some interesting Rishonim that you don't have necessarily available. There's a Meiri, there's a Rashba, because they're going to really talk about halacha l'maisa. But first, let's see the Nemukeyot. Let's see the Rif. We're going to start with the Rif. This is the end of the Gemara. Now we got to see with the Rif how we posture.
Can I ask a question?
Question still here.
Daniel,
I don't understand the fundamental point of saying that, well, the guy who's living in your house was doing some service because probably like he mowed the lawn or something like that. And so it goes both ways. But
if the drain was blocked, he unplugged the drain. He did some maintenance that the house would have fallen into disrepair, and he kept it in good shape.
Right, but that doesn't seem to go along with the general understanding of the Gemara, which is that obviously a tenant pays rent because the homeowner is providing a much greater service than the tenant does, even if the tenant.
Wait. You just shifted gears. You just shifted to a kaimel agra, and we're talking here about a low kaimel agra.
I see. Okay, thank you.
I don't need this reason for a kaimel agra. Kaimel agra, it's zen nanev is chaser. This is a reason for low kaimel agra. Okay.
Okay.
There was somebody else had a question before we go to the Nemuke Yosef.
Same question.
Okay, the Seder. So the Nemuke Yosef in the back, it really starts with the very, very bottom. If you have an old Nemuke Yosef, an old Rif, it's at the very, very bottom. The last words on Ches Amud Beis and the top of Tes Amud Aleph, where he quotes Rav Schora Amar Rav Huna. Okay. So here's going to be the psak halacha. It's again in the Dapei Harif, it's Daf Tes. Otherwise, if you have a newfangled Rif, you're going to have to find it based on our Gemara of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph.
Again, on the bottom of Daf Tes.
It's the last words on Ches Amud Beis. Basically, it runs into Tes Amud Aleph in the old fashioned Rif. So Amar Rav Schora Amar Rav Huna Hadar b'chatzar chaveru shalomi daito. Eino tzorech lahalot lo schar mishum shenemar v'shia yukachar. He's giving the reason of the demons. Omar Mar bar Rav Ashi lididi chazi li umangach kitura. I saw an abandoned house and it was just terrible. Rav Yosef Omar Beisa de miyasva yasva my benayu kebenayu komishtamish bebetivne v'tzivi. Okay, and that is all, says the Rif v'dafke b'chatzar de lo kaimel ha'agra. The afagav the ahu gavra ovid lemegar. The renter is nene. You don't have to pay rent. My time is a nene v'zel lo chaser. Aval b'chaser the kaimel ha'agra tzorich la lo schar. The afagav the lo ovid lemegar. The ha chasrei mamona. What does it mean? Afagav the lo ovid, that when it's kaimel ha'agra, but he didn't rent it right now, it's empty. Right now it's empty. At the end of the day, he's called a chasra mamona. He's causing him to lose money. We're going to see the Nemuke Yosef on all of this, but first let's leave the Rosh, the Rif, and go to the Rosh. Okay, so the Rosh is Perek Beis, Siman, I believe it's Siman Tet. I got it marked here. Perek Beis, Siman, I'm sorry, not Siman Tet, Siman Vav. Siman Vav.
The Rosh?
Perek Beis, Siman Vav. If you're in the old-fashioned Rosh, it's on page Kuf Chav Dal.
Where's the Rosh?
Ilema.
That's where it starts.
Kuf Chav what?
Kuf Chav Daled. It's a Siman Vav. In the old Rosh, it's Kuf Chav Daled. The Siman Vav. Okay, so Ilema v'chaser del chaimel ha'agra v'gaver delo ovid lemegar ze lo nene v'ze lo chaseru. In other words, when the Gemara asked the question, so do you have to pay rent or you don't have to pay rent? Okay, so in a case of chaser delo chaimel ha'agra v'gaver delo ovid lemegar, so it's a ze nene v'ze lo chaser. Pirush Ri, we did the Tosos, didn't we? We did the Tosos about the unstated case of ze lo nene v'ze chaser. Did we do that, Tosfos?
I'm not sure.
Wait, we must do that, Tosfos. I'm sorry. So go back to Chavala for a moment, because there are 3 out of 4 cases mentioned in the Gemara, and Tosfos zeroes in on the 4th, and there's a big machlokas rishon in what to do in the 4th case.
Tosfos Mostes?
So the Tosfos is on Chaf Amud Aleph, the very beginning of the Gemara. Tosfos is Chaf Amud Aleph, So again, we remember we had a question, right? On the fifth line for the bottom. Let's just remind ourselves how we got into all of this. Is because he asked a question. Do you have to pay rent or pay? Do you have to pay rent or you don't have to pay rent? And the Gemara says, wait a minute, hey chidami. If it's a chatzar lo kaimel agra v'gaver de lo avid lemegar, so the guy never rents and the house is never rented, so it's a zel lo nene v'zel lo chaser. So of course you don't have to pay rent. And if it's a gaver the ogir and if it's a guy who rents and a house that's normally rented, of course you have to pay rent because it's zen nene v'zel chaser. Okay, and therefore the only question we had was, what about a guy? So lo tzricha de chaser de lo kaimel agra. The house is normally not rented, but the gaver is avid lemegar. But he rents, so it says en of lo chaser. Says Tosfos, wait a minute, you left out one of the cases. Says Tosfos, ze ein nene v'ze ein chaser. In a case where the guy normally doesn't rent and the house is not for rent, so ze ein nene v'ze ein chaser. Says Tosfos, afilu b'chaser de kaimela agra, the gaver de lo avid lemegar. That's the case we didn't talk about. We talked about the guy who rents and the house is not for rent. What about the guy who doesn't rent and he moves into a house that is for rent? Daniel has a question already.
Which Tosfos?
Dibur amatzil v'ze ein nene v'ze ein chaser. Chaf amad aleph.
Amad aleph. Oh, amad aleph.
So afilu b'chaser de kaimela agra v'gaver de lo avid lemegar. That's the case we didn't talk about. So the chaser is an Airbnb, but this guy never rents. And he moved in. So he's a lo nene. And the other guy seems to be a chaser. So havimotzi lemeimer de potter. Kivan de shalo nene. He was a lo nene. Afal pi shegaram hefsid lechavero. By moving into the house that is normally rented, now nobody else is going to rent it because they're going to see that somebody's living there, so they will walk away and not rent it. So the guy, you caused the owner of the house loss by living there. So you were lo nene, but he was chaser. But how did you cause him chaser? It's groma. Because afilu girsho chavero mibeso v'noal deles befonav. What happens if you have a house, or you have a hotel, okay? And I put pit bulls and barbed wire in front of your hotel, and now nobody can get in. How much do I owe you? Says Tosas, I don't owe you anything because it's grama. Of course, b'dinei shamayim I'm chayiv. That's pashut, dinei shamayim. But technically, if I kicked you out of your house and now you can't get into your house, that's grama. So says Tosas, the guy who lived in the Airbnb without paying rent, but he never rents, so he's a lo nene. The balabait was chaser, he was chaser begrama. And therefore, ein zeh legrama ba'alma, and therefore, according to Tosfos, the case of kaimela agra and a person who is lo ovid lemegar, according to Tosfos, you're putter. Okay, I think you can imagine this may be a big maklokas rishonim. Okay. All right, good. So now let's go. Now we can go back to the Rosh. But again, remember, the Gemara talked about three cases explicitly. Lo kaimela agra, lo avid lemegar, definitely potter. Kaimela agra, avid lemegar, clearly chayav. The Gemara's question was that the house is a lo kaimela agra, but the guy's an avid lemegar, so I have a zenen and a zelo chaser. Says Tosas, what about the reverse case? Where the guy's a lo avid lemegar, but the house is the guy is a lo avid ogir, but the house is an avid lemegar, that the house is normally rented. Says Tosas potter. Says the Rosh. Now I'm back in the Rosh. Okay, I'm sorry. Back in the Rosh. Again, we're back at Siman Vav in the Rosh. Pirush Ri. Again, it's on the Dibur. He's going on the Gemara of Chatzar lo kaimel agra gaver lo avid lemegar. So they're potter. Ze lo nene v'ze lo chaser. Pirush Ri, which was the Tosfos. Hu adin nami b'chatzar de kaimel agra. The gaver de lo avid lemegar. De potter. Why? Kivan de lo nene hafal pisha garm hefsed lechavero. He's still potter. What's the argument? De afilu giresh chavero mi beso. The noal hadelet befana. You kicked your friend out of his house. You locked the door. He's got to now go take a hotel room. All right, so you made him you caused him a loss. Ein ze ela grama be'alma v'lo mechayev ela kishas hagzela. All right, and since you didn't steal anything, you didn't take anything away, so then you don't have to pay. V'chein hamekabel sara v'hovira. You took on a field, and you're gonna and you took on the field to give the guy 30% of the crops, and you didn't do anything with it. The only reason you might be chayiv is because there's an implicit contractual agreement that you will plant it. But technically, the fact that I passively prevented you from making money, that's not a chiyuv. That's not a chiyuv. That's only grum. Okay, so that is the Tosfos. The Omer b'Yushalmi zot omeret hamevatel kiso shel chaveiro patur. All right, you have a big investment. You have $10,000 you want to invest. Okay, and I lock your safe and throw away the key. Now you can't get to your money, and because of that, you lost the investment. So I'm putter. It's grum. Rav Alfa Zal Kosab Aval B'Chotzer Dekaima LaAgra Sarich LaLot Lo Schar Alfal Gav Dilo Avid LaMegar Dehachasrei Mamona. The Rif argues on the Tosfos, and he says at the end of the day you caused him a loss. Ukidvarav Bishmaita. Now he's going to prove from our Gemara that in the case of the person who rents, but the house was not for rent, you're going to have to pay because chasrei mamona, even though it was indirect. V'dvarv muchach b'shmaitin. How do we see that from our Gemara? Because remember, our Gemara never talked explicitly about a lo ovid lemegar, but the guy, I'm sorry, that the lo ovid lemegar has to pay. Shalchu be Rabbi Ami Omar v'chimo asazeh ma chasro umay ziko. So remember, in the if you go back to the Gemara, when it said, all right, when they were arguing about zen nene v'zeh lo chaser. So the argument to make him potter zen nene v'zeh lo chaser because the house is not up for rent. So what was the argument? Ma asazeh ma chasro ma ziko. So Ruvain normally rents. He lived in Shimon's house that Shimon never rents it out. So the argument, why should he be potter? He should be potter because he's an argument of ma asazeh ma chasro ma hiziko mashma ha chasro vihiziko, implying that if he for somehow or other would have made him lose some money, pshita shechayev, and therefore if I normally don't rent, so I was not nana, but your house you normally rent. And now because I'm living there, you can't rent, you don't rent it. That's called chasro. Okay? So it sounds from the Gemara like the only reason why a zen nene v'zel lo chaser doesn't pay is because lo chasro, but if I could reverse it and say that the owner of the house lost, I will have to pay. Umiu kvar hochachti she'ala chisaron ein chayev de lo havi ela grama be'alma. But again, this is the machlokas, whether that's a chiyuv or it's only grama. The ikal chiyuve mehai taima. If you want to make him chayiv, here's the big chiddush. So normally we hold mevatel kiso shel chavero. If I make a pure grama, okay, I lock you out of your house, and because of that you lost rent. I lock the house and nobody can get in. Do I have to pay? Everybody agrees I don't have to pay. So how come? If I'm a low ovid lamegar, and I moved into your house that's kaima la'agra, so what did I do? Why is that any different than just locking the house so nobody can get in? Everybody hear the question, or you got to hear the question before you hear the answer. All right, Tosfos wants to say that just like if I would lock your house and nobody could get in, and even if it's a hotel and it's a kaima la'agra, but if all I did is I locked the door and now nobody can get in, everybody agrees on potter. It's grama. So how in the world could you think that if I lived in it and therefore nobody rented it, and remember I'm not a nene because I'm a low ovid lamegar, but it's a kaima la'agra, he wants to claim that I should have to pay. And he's going to give you an argument why. Why? Mishum she'achal chisrono shel zeh v'lo dami lenoel beso shel chavero v'ladarbo. Oh, hamover sada shel chavero shelo bo liyodo klum michisron chavero. If I locked you out of the house, and because of that you lost rent, what did I get out of that?
Nothing.
What did I have if I locked you out of your house?
Nothing. Just
I have nothing. But if I lived in the house, even though I'm normally not going to rent, so you can't say that I have financial hana'ah, but at the end of the day, did you lose? Yes. And I'm eating, quote unquote, I'm consuming your loss because I'm living in the house. So there's a difference whether I lock you out of the house or I live in the house and have some indulgence of your loss. That's his chiddush here. Let's see it inside again. If there's any argument to you, make the guy chayiv. Again, we're in a person who normally doesn't rent, and he moves into a house that's normally rented, into an Airbnb, but he normally doesn't rent. So he's a lo nene. But the bailam is a chaser, but he's chaser begrama. So he says, if there's any way to be mechayev the guy, it's mehai taima ika l'chiyuve. This is the argument to make him chayev. Mishum she'achal chisronu shel zeh. He consumed what the other guy lost. V'lo dami livno el beso shel chavero v'lo darbo o hamover sara shel chavero shelo lo bar liyodo klum michisron chavero. In those two cases, the person who inflicted the indirect loss has nothing from that. Aval zeh afal gav delo nene shaya motza diro acheret bechinam. He could have found another house for free. Mikol makom hanoa miyar ka'afil. Mashechavero nifsad, v'chein nire. All right.
I have the lesson of miha makom hashta.
Hashta means in the case where he is a lo nene, but the other guy is a chaser, which was the case that Tosfos held his pater, and basically the Ri is saying that he agrees that he's pater, but if you want to make him chayiv, here's the way to make him chayiv. It's not quite the same as a pure grama. It's not a pure grama. Pure grama means I cause you loss and I have nothing from it. Here I had something from it, even though it's not called hana'ah because I didn't save rent. But I at the end of the day, your loss is sitting in my stomach, so to speak. All right? We'll say Amar Rav Schora, Amar Rav Huna, Hadar b'chatzar chaver shalom idaito ein tzarich lo schar shenemer she'ayu katshar ma'isi mehach kras machta. The sad ledvarav lo mi boy shu potter mishum dahave leizenen v'zelo chaser elafilu tova nami oso shimo shemana beso milistar. So what he said, the Gemara is saying here is it's very clear that the halacha is that hadar b'chatzar chaver shalom idaito ein tzarich lalot lo schar in a case where it's a zenen v'zelo chaser. And the only reason we said yukat shar, he's saying is just a tosefet. It's an addition. But the basic din is zenen v'zelo chaser. Again, we're talking here in a house where the house is lo kaimel agra, and the person rents. It's a zenen v'zelo chaser. In the reverse case, he wants to make an argument that maybe you should have to pay. The machlokas with Tosfos. Question still here because I want to see the Hagasa Ashri. The Hagasa Ashri is the second Hagah. It's letter Beis. Everybody has a real Rosh. You should have the Hagasa Ashri. All right, it's in the indented part, and it's letter Beis. Okay. He's going on the piece that says that it's not a real grama. It's more chayiv than a regular grama because in a regular grama I have nothing of yours, but here your loss is really I'm having something from your loss. Chen kosav mariach v'gam mitachila yochel la'akev al yado shelo yikonis beveso. Oh, now here's where the rubber hits the road. So if you live there in a zen nene v'zelo chaser, I'm pater. Can you stop me from living there? Can you stop me before I move in? If I live there, you can't charge me any money. Can you stop me before I move in? So he says,
it's private property.
Right? So it sounds to me like kofin al midas dom. Zenene v'zelo chaser. So why isn't this a kofin al midas dom? I want you guys to feel the problem here, because this is really the root of the whole sugya. If there is a zenen of zel lo chaser, that's kofin al midas dom. That's what we said about the fields, right? That the yoresh, he wants the field here, and if everybody else, it's no different to anybody else, kofin al midas dom. So why can't I force you to let me live in your house? So he says, ein bezeh mishum midas dom, ela b'mashe kvar dar ein tzarich lalot lo schar. After the fact, you don't have to pay rent. Afal pisha darsha, bal korcha. You didn't want me to live there, but if I live there, you can't charge me rent. But of course you could stop me. Pirishri. Ubesomach nabi gabi hegde shalom midas. The hecha the tochav lechavre beves hablia. Where does it go? Afal pi shalo hoya machzir hoya bol nimas velo hoya shum klum. Afal pi de be'aishaita lo chaser. All right. Okay. Let's leave this. This is going to get us into the case of the hektish. Remember what we said. Hektish is like hektish midas. There's no such thing as hektish shalom midas. Okay. So again, let's read it. Afal pishim haya machzir haya nimas velo haya shum klum. So that therefore the owner didn't lose anything because the guy who stuffed it down his throat was a mazik. Afal pi de be'aishaita lo chaser ba. So at the end of the day, the owner lost nothing by the fact that I swallowed it. Kivan dehana also bolo al yedei chesron shalzeh chayiv, and therefore we can get into the issue of kamle b'derabba mineh. Our pirish riva dafka hadar b'chayr. Here's what we want. Dafka hadar b'chatzer chavero v'lo gila da'atei denichale be'ahu ana. See, here's where we're getting into a very interesting thing. You have a house that you normally don't rent. And I'm nene. I would have to, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, the opposite. I never rent. I'm the low nene. I'm a low nene. Okay? But what happens if I indicate that, you know what? That I'm going to live in your house for free. Okay? Because you're not chaser. All right, you're not chaser. I want to live in your house for free. But what happens if I was megalad das, that if I would have to pay, I would have paid? That's what he's saying. That if he's galad daite denichale be'ahu ana, ella bechinam. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. That here, I'm sorry. These cases are all very confusing. Okay, that I was nene. In other words, I'm a nene. And you normally don't rent your house, and I lived there. Okay? So I was a nene because I would have had to rent. But what happens if I made it very clear that I'm only living here because it's free? I'm only living here because it's free. That's what it's saying. Hizigila daito de nichale be'ahu hana'a ela bechina. Avali gali bedaite de nichale be'ahi hana'a chayev. Meaning, even if I would have lived, I wouldn't have had to pay, because it's a zenene v'zel lo chaser, and therefore I'm allowed to live there for free. But what happens if I would have been megalad das, say, you know what, I'm moving in because you're not there, but if you would charge me, I would have paid. Where do we see that? That's going to come up in the case of the Reuven Shimon Levi case. See, when Reuven rented Shimon's house to Levi. When Reuven rented Shimon's house to Levi, what did it say in the Gemara? It said in the Gemara that the only reason why Levi has to pay is because Shimon's house is a kaima la'agra. Remember that we made a distinction whether Shimon's house is kaima la'agra or low kaima la'agra. What happens if Shimon's house is a low kaima la'agra, but did Levi indicate that he's ready to pay rent?
Yes.
How do I know that he's ready to pay rent? Because he was ready to rent. He thought that he's renting Reuven's house and he's going to pay Reuven $1,000. Okay? And then he moved into the house and it turns out that it wasn't Reuven's, it was Shimon's. And Shimon's house is a lo kaima la'agra. So says the Gemara, if it's a lo kaima la'agra, he shouldn't have to pay. Because it was dar b'chatzer chavero, shalom idaito, and it's lo kaima la'agra. But the twist here is that Levi already indicated that he's ready to pay rent. He's indicated that he's ready to pay rent. So then maybe he's going to have to pay. That's what this is really indicating here. This is what the Gosa Ashri is really indicating. Again, so Let's start from case one. Hadar b'chatzer chavero shalom midaito, where the guy is a renter, but the house is not for rent. We paskin hadar b'chatzer chavero shalom midaito, when the house is not a rentable house, doesn't have to pay. Okay, that's what we paskin. What happens if the guy who moved in shalom midaito indicated that the only when is it true? It's only when he says, you know what, I would have had to rent a house, I would have had to rent a hotel room. Hey, but this is free. I'm going into this for free. But what happens if he would have indicated that, you know what, if I would have to pay, I'd also go here. If I would have had to pay, I would go. It's lo kaima la'agra. But I give an indication that I would go, I would pay money if I had to. Then you may be chayiv. That's what the Agos Ari is saying. Is that the only time we say hadar b'chatzer chaver shalom midaito is potter, even though he normally rents, is because there's no indication that he did it except because it's free. Of course, I had another house. I have another house. I wouldn't have rented a hotel. I had a house. All right, my friends would have taken me in. But I went into your house. Your house is empty. I went into your house, and it's a lo kaima la'agra. If I would have indicated in any way that, you know what, I would have paid if I would have had to, but I went in because it's free, but I would have paid, then that Gemara seems to indicate that I would have to pay. Okay? Because there, it was only because it's kaima. That's the question is, Shimon indicated he's ready to pay rent, and that's going to be an issue here of why is it only when it's kaima la'agra, but he indicated that he's ready to pay rent. So this is one of the questions in the sugya. Let's go to the Nemukei Yosef, because the Nemukei Yosef is going to expand on all of this. Okay. Just a minute. Yeah. All right. So let's go to the back to the Gemara back to the Rif the Nemukei Yosef. So the Nemukei Yosef starts. Where does it start? Where do we want to start it? So the beginning of the Nemukei Yosef just quotes the Gemara, he quotes Rashi. So let's pick it up with again, it starts with you see where it's right in the middle of the Nemukei Yosef where it says Gemara Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. Okay, so all he does is he quotes the Gemara and he quotes Rashi. Skip down a number of lines. If you see where it starts, Daf Chaf Amud Aleph in the Nemukei Yosef, it's on Chet Amud Bet in the Nemukei Yosef. It's really almost in the middle. The first word on the line is B'Gemara, but I want you to count down 2, 4, count down 5 lines. Okay. And it starts with B'Chotzer the lo kaima la'agra. It's after 2 dots, and the Gemara. It's right in the middle of the line. You know, if we're going to go from the bottom, it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15 lines from the bottom. Right in the middle of the line, it says B'Chotzer the lo kaima la'agra. That's where we have to pick up the Nemukei Yosef. It's just a little bit. It's right in the middle of the wide lines of the Nemukei Yosef. It starts b'chatzer lo kaima la'agra. The first word on the line is lo sachar. That's the first words on the line. We need to go in b'chatzer lo kaima la'agra. What does that mean? Says the Nemukei Yosef. What's a chatzer lo kaima la'agra? She'eno ragil bal hachatzer le'ogra. That the owner normally doesn't rent it out. The afki lo hayadar zeh ba lo hayasochra. So if Ruvain, who's living there without permission, wouldn't have lived there, Shimon still would not rent it out. That's exactly a lo kaima la'agra. So then you're going to be pater. Ki heichid de lo sachra ad hashta. If till now he never rented it out, then he can't turn around and collect rent from Ruvain because Ruvain was a nene, but Shimon was a lo chaser. Okay, v'gavra de lo ovid lemegar, zehadar b'chatzer, Reuven who lived there, eino osui liskor chatzeros, he doesn't normally pay rent, either ilu l'fisha mitzuyin lo b'chinam, abatim lahashil, or yesh lo bayir acher, because he has another house, or he has friends who would put him up, and therefore he never rents. So then, it's clear, says the Gemara, That's a zel lo nene, v'zel lo chaser. So zel lo nene, the hashchichi lo bati mechinam. So Reuven has lots of options, doesn't need to move into Shimon's house. V'zel lo chaser, and Shimon's not losing anything. The lo kaima la agra, upshita de pater. So that's the first case in the Gemara, obviously pater. What about zen nene shahayat sarich liskor chaser acheres? Because he has no other place to live. V'zeh chaser, and it's an Airbnb. So kiven the kaima la agra. Haya maskira leacherim lule zeh shedar b'socha. So of course you're chayiv. So all he did is he summarized the two obvious cases. Zeh lo nene v'zeh lo chaser pater. Zeh nene v'zeh chaser chayiv. But now we get into the complicated cases. Kosav harosh zal. The lo matzi lemeimar ilu hiskarto leacher hayiti yotze. So he's in the case where the guy normally rents it. But Reuven's going to say, wait a minute, I live there. But you know what? I didn't cause you any loss. Because if anybody would have come by to rent it, I would have left. Right? If you would have brought in somebody to rent it, I would have left. The Omer le balabait, that doesn't work. The Omer le balachatzer calls man shera'u otcha dar bevesi have omrim muskarhu v'lohoyu boin l'sochro. So of course that's not a taina. Uchahai gav napshita shetzarch lalot loscha. And if it's a rentable place, then you got to pay. Okay. So, but if it's a low kaima la'agra, then he could taina maichas articha. V'lavachi lo mogris la. So what's the argument? But Omer le ha ahanyas. But you had hana di lo chaser didi. If you wouldn't have lived in my house, havius agar achrita, you would have had to pay money for somebody else. So the chaser de kaima la agra v'gavra dolo ovid lemegar lo hiskiruhu. So till now the Rosh has summarized all the arguments. That when it's a zen nene v'zeh chaser, of course you pay. Zen lo nene v'zeh lo chaser, of course you don't pay. Zeh nene v'zeh lo chaser, so he could say that you had hana di lo chaser di havi agris charisa. So zen nene v'zeh lo chaser, the Rosh is arguing you had hana and you have to pay for the hana. But what about when the chaser is kaima la agra, the gavar de lo ovid lemega? This is our unstated case. That again, the chatzar is kaima la'agra, and the gavra doesn't normally rent. So the only issue here is grama. Lo is kiruhu. It's not mentioned. The kasvu bale tosvos, as we saw, shezeh posherhu shehu potter. Why? Dichim mevatel kiso shel chavero. O ki achad ke lechavre beandruna. Shein Peturim, I locked you in your house. I locked you in your house and you lost the job. As long as I didn't touch you, didn't do anything to you, I'm potter. It's grama. But I'm potter. So therefore, the fact that I lived in your house, which was a kaima la'agra, but since all I did was cause you grama, and I had no hana'ah, so it says Tosfos, potter. The hara zal kosav. Shekol hagaonim pe echad omrim shu chayev. They all argue on Tosfos. We saw that allusion there to that in the Rosh. Shu chayev v'chein das rabo zal v'lo dami lemevatel kiso ulach hadre lechavre. It's not the same as mevatel kiso, which is a pure grama. Why is it not? We saw this in the Rosh. The hasam grama be'almahu aval bekan. Shedarba ve'achal peirosav. At the end of the day, so yeah, I wasn't nene, but you were chaser, and your chaser was consumed by me because I lived there. Chayev bevadai. And Teda, here's an interesting case. She'ilu achal adam peiros chavero chayev afal pishalo nene klap. You just finished a 6-course meal, and you are stuffed to the gills. Okay, and then you ate some of your friend's food. So you had no hana. It could have even caused you to regurgitate. You had absolutely no hana, but you ate your friend's food. So you were not nene, but your friend had a loss. So he wants to compare that to, you didn't have hana, but at the end of the day, you consumed your friend's food. You got to pay for that. Okay, and therefore he wants to say, that in the case where you lived in a house that you had no hana, but your friend lost, even the grama, you're going to be chayiv. It's not a standard case of grama. Because a standard case of grama, I caused you loss and I had nothing from it. Okay? Umiu, ilu lo darba ela shesagar kol hashana, potter. But again, if I locked up your kaimela agra, I didn't live in your kaimela agra, all right, I locked it up, and now nobody can get in. Potter. Ad kan lashona. V'chein kosav aritva, the kishalo darba grama be'almahu, that if I didn't live in it, I just locked it, I'm grama, but if I lived in it, I'm going to have to pay. V'chein kosav aramazal, the kishadarba chayev midi dihavi, akol de zokin de alma, de zechasav v'zelo nene. A big chiddush. And this, I'm going to just say a little insight that I have, that how I learned pshat in Nezikin. I think we've mentioned this before also. If I broke your window, do I need a pasuk to tell me that I'm chayiv, or is it obvious that I'm chayiv? We've talked about this before. Excuse me?
Obvious. You caused loss.
Yeah. What do I have? What do I have of yours in my pocket?
You caused me damage.
Yes. Listen to
So
your
why do you
words.
have to have something in your pocket?
Exactly. You don't need
Why
to
am
have
I paying you? When I steal your money, I steal your watch. I have your watch in my pocket. I got to give it back. I steal your $100. I have your $100 in my pocket. I got to give it back. I broke your window. What do I have of yours?
Why do you have to have something of somebody else's to be chayiv?
Why don't? How else do I become chayiv?
Because you're causing a loss to the other person.
Who said that you just described grama?
Why is it grama?
Basic Rabbi.
Because I don't have anything. I made you go to the glassmaker to spend $100. I caused you to have to spend $100. So the only reason, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, the only reason I have to pay is because there's a chiddush in the Torah that you have to pay for masik. The default is that I didn't take anything away from you.
That's a
The
chiddush.
Torah was mechadesh that yes, but if I'm a mazik has to pay. So why is he accessing that? Because he's showing you that every mazik has to pay even though he doesn't have any benefit from it. Every mazik pays because he caused damage, even though he didn't benefit. But that's only if I cause direct damage. But if I'm a groma and I don't have any benefit, I don't have to pay. I want you to see this inside. The kishalo darba groma be'almahu. V'chein kosav haramazal. Kishadarba chayev midi. If he lives in the house, then he's chayev midi dahave akol dezakin de alma dezeh chaser v'zeh lo nene. Meaning he wants to say that I have to pay because even though I had no benefit, just like the Torah makes every mazik chayev, even when he doesn't have benefit, so certainly if I lived in your house and I caused you damage, so I should have to pay. You're telling me I didn't have any benefit from it, but the fact that I consumed your loss makes me chayev. El shecholek zalvi omer de shevet shelo b'makom nezek. Shevet means unemployment insurance. If I put you in the hospital for 2 days, I got to pay your doctor bills and I also have to pay your unemployment because you lost income. So the shevet b'makom nezek nami kigon dehadke be'andruna. Chayev kidisa beperek achova v'kol hecha dekaima la'agra v'gorim lafsude kigon degaz lamine. If it was a kaima la'agra and I lived there, it's as if I stole from you. Afal lo darba chayev. I'm sorry. He's saying like this. He's saying that he wants to make you chayev even for locking up the door. Afal lo darba chayev afilu leman lo doin dina de garmi. So we have a big machlokas. In other words, the Rosh wanted to say that the only reason I'm chayev is because I actually lived in the house. But there are other Rishonim that want to say, he's bringing, no. That if I prevented people from going into the house by locking the door, that's like a mazik. That's not a real, that's worse than a grama. Again, so there's a machlokas here again. Where's the machlokas? The machlokas is on the case where the house was a kaima la'agra, but I was not an ovid demegar. I don't normally rent, and I moved in. Okay, so some machlokas tosas in the Rosh whether I have to pay rent or not. That's the machlokas. We're going to see this in the Torah and in the Shulchan Aruch later. and then the Rambam. But there's a little more in the Nimukei Yosef. We have to see more in the Nimukei Yosef. So hold your finger there, and all right. There's no shir on Wednesday. Next Sunday we will pick it up there. We'll finish the Nimukei Yosef and go to the Rambam, Tur, and Shulchan Aruch. Okay, the Tur Shin Samach Gimel. But first you'll have the Rambam. We're just going to finish this little piece of Nimukei Yosef, and then we'll go to the Rambam and the Tur. Okay. All right, we should do Besorot Tovot, everybody.
Amen.
Amen.
Purim
Keni
Sameach.
Ratzon.
The Nahafachu, Purim, right? Nehefach mi Soso mi Avel mi Yagon l'Simcha. Kol Tuv.
Amen.